Baby, listen closely, because what unfolded inside that Los Angeles courtroom today wasn't a hearing, it was a horror movie playing out in real time, and the man sitting at that defendant's table with the blank stare and the barely contained smirk is the same rising music star that millions of teenagers were streaming on Spotify less than a year ago. D4vd. David Anthony Burke. 21 years old. Once the golden boy of Fortnite lobbies and Coachella crowds, now a man staring down the possibility of the death penalty for the alleged murder and dismemberment of a 14-year-old girl whose body was found rotting inside the front trunk of his Tesla. And sweetheart, if you thought you'd already heard the worst of this case, buckle in, because what came out in that courtroom today rewrote everything. I need you to sit with that image for a second. A Tesla parked on a quiet street in the Hollywood Hills. A stench so violent that a tow yard employee couldn't stop retching. Insects swarming the front storage compartment. And inside, a black cadaver bag containing what remained of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a child who had barely lived long enough to finish middle school. This is the case against D4vd. And after months of delays, after 3 status conferences that felt like nothing was ever going to happen, the preliminary hearing has finally cracked open, and the floor is about to fall out from under the defense. Let me walk you through what happened, because the people in that room today saw things that reporters said they physically could not type through. Prosecutors put photos on the screen, evidence photos of the victims remained still inside that Tesla, and NBC's Julia Deng, who was seated 3 rows behind Celeste's mother Mercedes, said the entire press section stopped breathing. Reporters froze. Fingers came off keyboards. And Mercedes, a mother who had spent months waiting for answers, bowed her head and wept as the pictures of what allegedly happened to her baby filled the courtroom screens. Meanwhile, 3 rows in front of her, David Burke sat there. Bored. Uninterested. According to multiple accounts inside that courtroom, D4vd looked like he was waiting for a dentist appointment to end. Any way you slice it, that demeanor is going to haunt this trial. Because the prosecution has not just built a case, they have built a mountain. And every rock in that mountain has D4vd's name carved into it. Let's start at the beginning, because the timeline in this case is genuinely one of the most disturbing chronologies I have ever laid eyes on. According to the pre-trial brief filed by prosecutors, David Burke and Celeste Rivas Hernandez first crossed paths in January of 2022. She was 11 years old. He was 17. Prosecutors allege that by November of 2023, when Celeste had just turned 13, the relationship had already turned sexual. And the evidence they are prepared to introduce is not circumstantial, it is, according to the brief, photographic. Images of the victim, naked, engaged in sexual activity with the defendant when she was 13 years old. Prosecutors have already made clear those photographs will not be shown in open court because they constitute child sexual abuse material. But the fact that they exist, that they are logged into the evidence ledger of the people of the state of California, is enough to detonate any defense that tries to argue this was a misunderstanding. And here is where the story going around gets even darker. According to prosecutors, text messages recovered from David Burke's iCloud data allegedly reference pregnancy, abortion, Plan B emergency contraception. Messages in which Celeste, a child, wrote to David, quote, "All we do is have sex and just hang out. Man, I want more than that for myself." Read that again. Now imagine you are her mother, sitting in that courtroom this morning. By February of 2024, Celeste had been reported missing by her family in Lake Elsinore, California. Riverside County deputies traced a phone number from her record straight to David Burke's West Hollywood home. Los Angeles Sheriff's deputies drove up to 804 North Doheny Place that night at 8:15 p.m. and told D4vd point-blank that the girl was a 13-year-old runaway. And David? D4vd allegedly told them he had no idea she was underage. He said he thought she was 18. Then, this is the part that makes your skin crawl, he pulled out his phone and showed the deputies her yearbook photo. Her yearbook photo. From middle school. Celeste returned home 2 days later. And here is the twist that prosecutors say proves David Burke's obsession went beyond anything a jury could excuse. Her parents took her cell phone away to protect her. So D4vd allegedly drove all the way down to Lake Elsinore, tracked down a junior high school classmate of hers, and paid that classmate $1,000 in cash to deliver a new phone to Celeste, a phone David had purchased so he could keep talking to her. A grown man with a rising major label music career, bribing a 7th grader to smuggle a phone to a 13-year-old. And it worked. Throughout 2024, prosecutors claim Celeste spent summer weekends at D4vd's Hollywood Hills rental. She allegedly traveled with him to Las Vegas, to London, to Texas to meet his family. She was photographed backstage at one of his LA shows in June of 2024. In January of that same year, she appeared alongside him in a Twitch live stream. This was not hidden. This was in plain sight. And nobody with the power to stop it, stopped it. Now here is where the whisper mill starts running, because you have to understand the financial machinery humming underneath every single one of these dates. A business associate of David's testified today. This man handled the accounting for the record label that signed D4vd when he first arrived in Los Angeles from Texas. And the numbers he laid out on that witness stand are staggering. Between 2023 and the end of 2025, David Anthony Burke pulled in gross earnings of $10 to $11.5 million. The head of his record label pocketed somewhere between $3.5 and $4 million just off of David alone. Product endorsements, streaming royalties, touring revenue. His debut studio album Withered was slated for release on April 25, 2025, a release that industry insiders were describing as the launch of a multi-million-dollar career trajectory. Why does that matter? Because prosecutors are charging D4vd with first-degree murder with 3 separate special circumstances. Lying in wait, killing a witness in an investigation, and, the one that is going to haunt him for the rest of his life, murder for financial gain. That single special circumstance is what puts David Burke in the death penalty conversation in the state of California. And the theory of the case is chilling in its simplicity. Prosecutors allege that Celeste Rivas Hernandez threatened to expose the illegal relationship. That exposure would have detonated D4vd's career. And so, according to the people of the state of California, David Anthony Burke made the calculation that a 14-year-old girl's life was worth less than an album release. Let's talk about April 22, 2025. The night before prosecutors say Celeste was murdered. According to the pre-trial brief, D4vd and Celeste engaged in a lengthy argument, entirely documented in their text messages. She was jealous. She had reason to be. The prosecution says David had been leading her to believe they had a future together while carrying on with other women. And Celeste, allegedly, snapped. She threatened, in writing, to expose the relationship. To end his career. To destroy his life. April 23, 2025. This is the day the state of California believes Celeste Rivas Hernandez was killed. At approximately 8:40 p.m., prosecutors say D4vd ordered an Uber from his own account to pick Celeste up from Lake Elsinore and drive her to his home in the Hollywood Hills. Uber records confirm the transaction. They allegedly communicated during the ride. The driver dropped her off at his Hollywood Hills house at approximately 10:10 p.m. 20 minutes later, at 10:30 p.m., David Burke started texting her phone asking where she was. And prosecutors say this was the moment the alibi machinery began. Because they contend Celeste was already dead. That D4vd stabbed her multiple times almost the instant she walked through his front door and then stood by while she bled out. He did not call 911. He did not drive her to a hospital. He did not scream for help. Instead, according to the brief, David Anthony Burke got into his Tesla at approximately 11:30 p.m. that same night and drove north on the 101 freeway toward Santa Barbara County. To San Marcos Pass Road. To an isolated stretch of State Route 154 near Lake Cachuma, a place investigators would later return to again and again in this investigation. He allegedly disposed of her belongings there. Then he drove home. Slept. And the following morning, he showed up to a radio interview to promote the release of Withered. The record dropped on April 25, 2025. The world celebrated a rising star. And upstairs, inside the Hollywood Hills, allegedly, a 14-year-old girl was lying dead in his garage. Now the ceiling starts to cave in on the defense, because what prosecutors say David did next is where this case stops being a murder trial and becomes something else entirely. On April 24, D4vd allegedly ordered a shovel from Home Depot. On May 1, 2 chainsaws arrived from Amazon. On May 5, a body bag. Heavy-duty laundry bags. And a blue inflatable pool. All ordered under the fake name Victoria Mendez. On July 7, a burn cage. Also under the fake name. And prosecutors are prepared to walk a jury through every single Amazon receipt, every credit card record, every delivery confirmation. And here is the part one need you to steady yourself for. Because what the state of California alleges David Anthony Burke did between May and August of 2025, inside that garage in the Hollywood Hills, is beyond comprehension. Prosecutors say D4vd placed Celeste's body into the blue inflatable pool to keep her blood from spilling onto the concrete. They allege he used a chainsaw and possibly other tools to dismember her. Forensic analysts at the LAPD's Trace Evidence Unit later matched tiny blue plastic fragments embedded in Celeste's remains to that same inflatable pool. A physical fit match. That is not opinion evidence. That is not circumstantial. That is puzzle pieces snapping together in a laboratory. And prosecutors say David did something else. Something so specific it feels almost mythological in its cruelty. Celeste Rivas Hernandez had a small tattoo on her left ring finger. A tattoo of the letters that spelled out David's stage name. So, according to the brief, D4vd amputated her left ring finger. And her pinky. To distance himself from the crime. Those fingers have never been recovered. He then allegedly placed her head and torso into the cadaver bag. Her limbs into a garbage bag. Loaded both into the front trunk of his Tesla. And left. 4 weeks. Possibly months. Meanwhile, David Anthony Burke launched his Withered World Tour on August 5, 2025 in Del Mar, California, with performances scheduled across the United States and Europe through November. The Tesla sat on Bluebird Avenue, 400 feet from his front door, decomposing in the California summer sun. On September 3, 2025, the vehicle was ticketed. On September 5, it was towed to the Hollywood impound lot. On September 8, the day after what would have been Celeste's 15th birthday, the tow yard manager reported an unbearable smell of decay and clouds of flies swarming the front trunk. LAPD robbery homicide detectives responded. They opened the front storage compartment. They saw the black cadaver bag. They saw the insects. And inside that bag, they saw the severely decomposed remains of a child. DNA testing confirmed her identity. Dental records confirmed her identity. And on the inside of her index finger, investigators found another tattoo. 2 letters. SH. A tattoo D4vd himself allegedly has a matching version of. And people around David started to notice things. Business associates. Friends. Members of his own inner circle. They noticed the strong smell of decay in and around his home and vehicle for weeks. Prosecutors say D4vd lied to every single one of them. On July 4, 2025, according to TMZ, a live stream captured David allegedly apologizing to friends Neo Langston and Sukana for how his bathroom smelled, claiming, laughably, that he had just used it 2 hours earlier. The prosecution is going to argue that was not embarrassment. That was cover-up. Now the machinery of this case pivots. Because as investigators closed in, David Burke made moves. On September 17, 2025, LAPD served a search warrant on the Hollywood Hills rental, a $20,000 a month property. Inside the garage they found the inflatable pool with multiple linear cuts across it. They found biological samples that tested positive for blood. They found DNA that matched Celeste's unique genetic profile. Bags of evidence were removed from that garage. And on September 19, D4vd officially cancelled the rest of his Withered World Tour. On September 23, 4 days later, he transferred ownership of his Texas home to his mother, Colleen Burke. Colleen Burke, by the way, was operating as David's manager. And the wrongful death attorney for Celeste's family, Patrick Steinfeld, had words for her today outside the courthouse. He said, and I'll leave that right there for you to sit with, that he understands a mother's desire to protect her son, but at some point you have to stop babying a grown man and force him to take accountability for his actions. He said, on camera, that it appeared to him the entire Burke family was operating with one singular interest, protecting the millions and millions of dollars David had generated over the last few years. That's not gossip. That's a lawyer with a legal pad and a wrongful death filing on the way. Meanwhile, the LAPD locked the case down. They petitioned the court to seal the medical examiner's report. On November 21, 2025, judge granted a security hold on Celeste's autopsy, a highly unusual maneuver that even the chief medical examiner, Dr. Odi Akpo, publicly criticized. He said in a statement that placing security holds on medical examiner cases at law enforcement request is virtually unheard of in other California counties. He said his department was committed to transparency. And he said the law precluded him from disclosing anything until the court order was lifted. That order would eventually be lifted. And when it was, the world would learn what Celeste's autopsy revealed. 2 penetrating wounds to the torso with smooth edges consistent with sharp force injury. A wound to the upper abdomen that pierced the liver. A wound to the left chest that penetrated the intercostal space and disrupted the adjacent ribs. Full-thickness dismemberment of all 4 extremities. Toxicology showing trace ethanol, benzodiazepines, and MDMA in her system. Cause of death, multiple penetrating injuries. Manner of death, homicide. And still, the arrest didn't come immediately. Because prosecutors were building something bigger. 3 separate grand juries were reportedly convened to hear evidence in this case. D4vd's manager, Robert Morgan Roth, allegedly testified. His purported friend Neil Langston was arrested in Montana in January 2026 on a failure to appear as witness charge. Langston later appeared in a Los Angeles courtroom for a grand jury session reported to have lasted only 30 to 40 minutes, a duration so short it has legal analysts speculating about immunity deals or Fifth Amendment pleadings. David's own family fought their subpoenas in Texas. His father. His mother. His brother. They challenged the orders to travel to Los Angeles and testify. A Texas court denied their petition. And in that Texas hearing, Waller County Assistant District Attorney Bennett Dodson said something that essentially confirmed everything the public had been suspecting for months. He told the court, quote, that if a car with a dismembered decomposing body is registered to your home address, you should expect to be questioned by authorities. And then he confirmed the sentence people had been waiting to hear. There is a murder investigation into Celeste's death. And David Anthony Burke is the target. On April 16, 2026, armed personnel took D4vd into custody at a Hollywood Hills home just over a mile from the tow yard where Celeste's body had been discovered. He had been in hiding for months. No public appearances. No social media presence. Radio silence since the tour cancellation. 4 days later, on April 20, LA County District Attorney Nathan Hochman stood at a podium and announced the formal charges. First-degree murder with 3 special circumstances. Continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14. Lewd and lascivious acts with a child under 14. And unlawful mutilation of human remains. Hochman was blunt. He said the death penalty determination will come later. He said the family had been through a nightmare no parent should ever endure. And in the courtroom that same day, David Burke sat beside his defense attorney, Blair Burke, one of the most expensive celebrity criminal defense lawyers in the country. Burke immediately went on the offensive, telling the court that the actual evidence will show D4vd did not murder Celeste Rivas Hernandez and was not the cause of her death. That is going to be the defense. Not, he didn't do it because he wasn't there. Not, he didn't do it because someone else did. The defense's opening play is that whatever killed Celeste, it wasn't David's hand. And they are going to have to sell that theory to a jury while the prosecution walks them through 40 terabytes of discovery, blue plastic fragments, chainsaw purchases, a fake alias named Victoria Mendez, and a Tesla that held a child's body for months. Today, on the first day of the preliminary hearing, the fight over how D4vd would even appear in that courtroom took place before proceedings began. The defense had filed a motion on July 10 asking that David be unshackled. Their argument was that jurors seeing him in handcuffs and leg irons would create an appearance of guilt. The judge compromised. She allowed his wrists to be uncuffed to facilitate note passing between David and his attorneys. But his waist and his feet, those remained shackled. And then the hearing began. 3 witnesses testified today. A Los Angeles County Sheriff's senior deputy who visited D4vd's home during the 2024 welfare check. An LAPD robbery homicide detective who was called to the Hollywood tow yard when Celeste's remains were discovered. And the record label accountant who laid out David's financial empire and the millions of dollars flowing through his career. Body camera footage from the 2024 welfare check was played in open court. Photographs of Celeste's remains inside the Tesla were displayed. Reporters described the room as unable to breathe. And through all of it, D4vd sat there. Bored. According to the reporters seated inside the courtroom, David Anthony Burke, the man whose signature song was streamed by tens of millions of teenagers, looked like a man watching paint dry. The hearing is scheduled to continue for 3 to 5 days. More witnesses. More evidence. More photographs. And DA Nathan Hochman has promised to speak with the press again once the preliminary hearing concludes. He said he will take questions. He said he will address the death penalty question directly at that time. But sweetheart, here is the thing that keeps rattling around my head as I read every page of this brief. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 11 years old when this began. She was 14 when it ended. Her mother sat in that courtroom today watching photographs of her baby's remains projected onto a screen. Her father was beside her. And 3 rows in front of them sat the 21-year-old rising music star who prosecutors say ordered chainsaws under a fake name, dismembered a child in an inflatable pool, and drove her body around Los Angeles in the trunk of a Tesla while performing on stage in front of adoring crowds. If the state of California proves what it says it can prove, this will be remembered as one of the most cold-blooded, financially motivated murders of a minor in modern American music history. So I have to ask you. Because you know I want to know. Do you think D4vd's defense, the claim that David Burke did not cause Celeste's death, has any real path in front of a jury, given the mountain of physical evidence the prosecution is prepared to introduce? Or do you think this preliminary hearing is the beginning of a slow, unstoppable march toward a death penalty trial that will define a decade of true crime coverage? Drop your verdict in the comments section below. I read every single one, and this is a conversation this community needs to have out loud. I'll be back the moment day 2 of this hearing breaks, and I promise you, based on what prosecutors have already teased about the coming testimony, we are nowhere near the worst of what's about to come out of that courtroom. Subscribe. Turn the notifications on. Because the David Anthony Burke story is not slowing down, it is just beginning to accelerate. Until then, stay careful out there. Watch who your children talk to online. And remember that Celeste Rivas Hernandez was somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, somebody's whole world, and she deserves every ounce of justice this system is capable of delivering. I'll see you on day 2.